This show starts at 10 o'clock sharp, so it must be 10 o'clock. Actually, we're a couple of minutes late. Sorry for that delay. For the next few minutes, we're going to talk about what's going on in Denver. My hat is from the University of Denver, and I'm going to try and get these in yellow and maybe call them our thinking caps, but this is extra warm. It's made by one of the independent sporting goods retailers. I used to work with outdoor sports and got to know that industry a bit there. And this is a company I've always admired. They've done a great job. Today, we're going to talk about the internet, what's good, what's bad, what's beautiful, what's ugly. My thinking in this has been sparked by a couple of books I've read recently that I'll share with you. We're also going to talk about strengths and why they are important. I'll share with you my top 5 strengths and give you a website where you can go for a free strengths test, or you can buy a copy of the very popular book, Strength Finder 2.0, that's just selling like crazy. It's on the bestseller list nearly every week. I finally took it, and it was very interesting and helpful. I'm going to share with you the results of that. And then we'll talk about changes in the Idea Cafe startup workshops that are planned, that will be rolling out starting this afternoon at our meeting here in Denver. Every Friday afternoon at 2 o'clock here in Denver, we gather in Panera Bread, just a block from the Colorado State Capitol. We gather there at 13th and Grant to share our startup experience and utilize a brainstorming type technique to address specific concerns. And we're going to make some changes in what we're doing with that, and I'll talk to you about those later in the show. But first, the University of Denver has a basketball game tonight. I'll be there. If you're there, see me in section 1. I'll be in row 12, seat 13, right by the landing. As you go in, the usher, you'll see me just right there, and it'd be great to have you stop by and say hello. This is the Startup Workshop. We're sponsored by the Small Business Chamber of Commerce, which is really just me right now, in a way, although we have 7,000 people that have said they like what we're doing and they stay in touch via the internet. Now, how much that's worth, we'll talk about here in just a minute. We're going to put much more of an emphasis on face-to-face conversations in this coming year. The Small Business Chamber was formed by me. It evolved out of a startup workshop I've done here in Denver for over 20 years now. And I actually went on a retreat, and the priest leading the retreat, I talked to him about what I was doing. He says, I think what you're doing is valuable, but you need to somehow take it to the next level, or when you die and go away, this won't happen anymore. And I think what you're doing is valuable. So that's what I've been struggling with. We've done various attempts at getting other people involved. We've got a new way of doing it coming up that we'll talk about. Not so much today. We're going to talk about the meeting itself today, but next week I'll talk with you about some new ideas that are in the development stage of how we're going to spread these little startup workshops to other places. 5280 Magazine has said that we've infused Denver with an entrepreneurial spirit, and we'd like to do that across Colorado, across the country, and we need your help to do it. And next week especially, we'll be talking about how you might get involved in starting a little startup workshop like we do here in Denver, in cooperation with your local chamber or other group there where you are. I think the best time to have it is 2 o'clock Friday afternoon. Now, that's a bad time, except for the people that we're really trying to help, the people who are at the end of the week and they are kind of at the end of their rope. End of the week, end of the rope. What am I going to do? They're not. A friend of mine who's passed on, Harvey Kalmeyer, used to say the most important question in business is, what are you going to do Monday morning? And so these groups are designed to be helpful, especially to the person that's just not sure what they're going to do Monday morning, either because they're looking for a new job, a new career, or they've decided they want to start a new project or a campaign, or they're starting a new business, but they're not quite nailed together quite yet. And so we try to have a meeting that's helpful, and then they go off and get started. I've really been encouraging people in the past to just come once, but that's going to be changed, and I'll talk to you more about that later today. So, the internet. Are you on the internet? Well, obviously you are. You wouldn't be watching this show unless somebody's burned a DVD and passed it on to you, which I hope that's happening. If it is, let me know and I'll recognize whoever's doing it here on the air. But the internet is it's sort of like fire. You know, it's good and it's bad. If your house burns down, you know, it's not such a good thing. If you have a fire in the fireplace and it's keeping you warm, that's a good thing. So just like fire, the internet is so powerful, and it's being misused and abused in various ways. But let's talk about the good side first. And a couple of books have come out that I've read through that I think you're going to hear more about. The first one is published by the American Management Association, and it's A World Gone Social. And it's written by Ted Coyne, who you probably know from Forbes magazine. He's in there a lot. And Mark Babbitt, who is the CEO and founder of U-Turn, a social community for young careerists that Mashable calls a top 5 online community for starting your career. Mark lives in Seattle, Washington. Mark Babbitt. Now, they are with us on the show today via their book, which has just come out. I've just read through it, and it is worth reading. And here's what they say, is that social is changing the business world. And what you are seeing is a leveling of the playing field. It's a little bit like the Flat book. Who was that wrote the book not that long ago? Columnist for the New York Times. He wrote the book about how we're becoming connected and closer via the internet. And what these two authors are doing is taking that to the next level. And what they're saying is that now that we're social media is totally changing the way that businesses are having to think, especially these large corporations. You know, the way the large corporations maintained a competitive advantage was keeping secrets, and it's harder and harder to do that. In a way, we're moving into a world of total transparency. Now, I see this as a good thing. It was always assumed in our economic model that we had the economic man, you know, it's what they would call person, the economic person who wants to maximize their own benefits, and then you have suppliers that respond to that. And economic models about competition have always assumed total transparency, which we have not really had, because large corporations can maintain things secretly. And I think they're trying to do even more of this. A lot of the changes in patent laws that have just been pushed through, very advantageous to the very large company. And I think they're seeing this social change coming. They're trying to find a way to maintain that secrecy. And hopefully we'll have legislators that will not allow them to do that. First step towards that is this net neutrality, which is being talked about, which is a total fraud. What it's saying is that we want to operate the internet now like it was the telephone company, an unlimited commodity. We want to go back to the good old days of the Bell system. Now, the Bell system had its advantages. To tell you the truth, I argued against the breakup at the time, and I'll tell you why, is because I thought that it was the one thing in our country that really worked well. You know, you could pick up a telephone in almost anyone's home and get connected with anyone in the world at a fairly reasonable price. Now, what have the technology come about that has over the last, Judge Green made the decision to break up the Bell system, become competitive. We've had all kinds of technological advances. I mean, I've always thought in my own mind, there's no way to prove this, of course, but that we would have been just as well off if the Bell system hadn't broken up. I don't think you can keep the genie in the bottle forever, and that the technological changes that have come out would have happened anyway. And what would have been preserved was low-cost service in every home. You know, it used to be the objective of the Bell system to have affordable telephone system, a telephone set in every single person's home. So you could get a one-line simple set for just a few dollars a month. Those days are long gone. I mean, the price for the small user has gone up and up and up and up. And now we pay for our cell phone what it used to be that we would pay for a house or at least a car. You know, it's a car payment, a house payment. Now that's our telephone, and they are wonderful devices. I depend on mine. A good chance you depend on yours. But what about the person that can't afford that? And that's something we need to be addressing more than we are. I think this divide that's widening between the haves and the have-nots has to be addressed, or it will be addressed in a very unpleasant way. You know, it leads to discontent, and there are always people that come in and mobilize that discontent, take advantage of it for various purposes. And whether it's, you know, the church recruiting new members, or whether it's a political party trying to attract new members, they have to have something they're trying to do that they need more people for. And the discontented, the poor and the discontented are the best place to recruit. And Pope Francis, I think, is a wonderful man. I don't think he understands economics at all, but I think he realizes that the poor is where the church should be, because that's the people that need help. And you reach out, but you also bring them into your institution. And that's at least part of his thinking. And, you know, anybody would say, well, no, I just want to help. But there's always some motivation behind helping. And I think the church is a wonderful thing. I'm part of it, at least for now. I may not be Pope Francis's favorite Catholic, but it's a very important part of my life. And I encourage anyone to take a look at it. But it's a cracked earthen vessel that holds this divine spark of truth that makes it all worthwhile. It's not perfect. And the Pope clearly is not perfect. People think that Catholics think the Pope is perfect. That's not true. You know, the Pope may speak ex cathedra from time to time, in that official, rarefied position. What the Pope says goes with the church. As with a family, at some point, a leader has to say, this is what we're going to do. And that's what's so difficult today, is that it's hard to decide who the leader is. The mom, the dad, one of the dads, one of the moms. It's such a chaotic mess in the families. And the church is similar to that, except they do have some clarifying principles, because they know they wouldn't be able to maintain themselves if they didn't. And I think there's a divine aspect to the church also that is very, very real, that holds us together. But it's clearly not utopia here on earth. It is a taste of heaven on earth, but it's not heaven on earth. So, you know, the poor need to be our primary concern. And the old Bell system had that in mind very clearly. And I didn't want to see that lost. And I think we're in danger of that being played out now. Unless somebody, how about this? How about if the church would start making it a mission to get a smartphone and the training to use it into the hands of every poor person? And, you know, instead we're giving them hugs. And that's fine. I mean, I don't want to demonize the poor. There are brothers and sisters, but why, you know, if you want to help somebody, it's the old saying, you don't give them a fish, you teach them how to fish. And I'd like to see the church do that. Maybe it could start with smartphones. How about if every person that can't afford to have one in an RCIA class, right, of Christian initiation for adults, which I also dislike. It's this barrier to becoming a part of the church that is totally unnecessary. I think it's really a filter to keep people out. I'm hoping Pope Francis will reform that, but here it is. So since it is there, and miraculous things happen through it. There is a spirit that moves through it. It wasn't helpful to me. I just couldn't do it. I finally had to just work with a priest, and that's always an option for anyone. Just go to your nearest Catholic parish, ask to speak with a priest, and say you'd like to become Catholic. You don't want to wait till next fall's RCIA class, which some of them And if they won't do it, go to the next church, go to the next church. You'll find one that will. But how about if every RCI class made sure every member had a smartphone and knew how to use it? And so we bring poor in, we give them that tool, and then help them find a way to use it. Who knows, maybe encourage them to go to an Idea Cafe startup workshop. So I'll tell you more about that in a minute. But this is the book that talks about the good side, in my mind, of social media and the internet, is that it's putting the heat to very large corporations. Their term for it is a flattening. We've sort of done away with middle management. Now we're doing away with, the little bit of management that's left. And you end up with flat organizations, totally flat, where there is someone that's the designated person that signs the papers, but that the company is structured so that it is working together. And it really is individuals associated. Eagles don't flock. Ross Perot used to say it. His company was very successful, and they had that philosophy. Every employee was empowered to do what they need to do to get the job done, because he said eagles don't flock. And that's exactly what this flattening does, is it views every employee as an eagle. Now, what can we do to support them? Turns the management pyramid upside down so that the managers become servants. And what's that going to do with their multi-million-dollar paycheck? I bet it affects it. It's outrageous how much these CEOs are manipulating the board to pay them. They've got big consulting firms like McKinsey they pay a fortune to come in and justify their salary, which is out of sight. And why isn't the Small Business Administration attacking that? They don't attack anything. This country was doing just fine until the SBA came along, and it's just gone into a nosedive. I think the first thing I would do if I were in charge is, just cut off the SBA. Yes, they do some things for more mature businesses, but so do banks. And banks have totally gotten away. This craziness that we've had in banking, they no longer want to make business loans. They want to make car loans, do consumer lending, home mortgages that they do these toxic roll-ups with. It's my understanding that's happening again now with commercial properties. There are restrictions on houses, so they're doing it with commercial properties. It's going to be an even bigger catastrophe. But the social media could be our salvation, is one way of looking at it. Now, there is another side. What are we losing? And this is a book that is just out that is terrific. And I've been waiting for a book like this. It's Susan Pinker's The Village Effect. And she calls the village effect the really physiological change that happens in us when we get together face to face with other people. It can be one-on-one at the dinner table with our spouse. It can be in a neighborhood meeting, any kind of a meeting where you gather together in the same room. You can't do it over the internet. Now, the internet can be useful as a pointer. I can tell you about the Idea Cafe Startup Workshop, and you'll know about it, so maybe you come because of the internet. But as far as what happens at that meeting itself, you have to be there. I guess you just sort of had to be there. And I've seen it happen. You bring people into that environment and their biochemistry changes. They become more enthused. They see the possibilities instead of the problems, and they go out and get started. And we've been doing that for over 20 years. And that's why 5280 magazine praises us. And the publisher told his startup story, which I've heard hundreds, maybe thousands of now. And businesses just flat out do not hardly ever start the way the SBA says that they should start. We have this academic entrepreneurship now that's on college campuses. When I got my MBA, there was nothing on entrepreneurship per se. Now every campus is trying to use that as a recruitment tool. And what they're teaching is harmful. They're teaching that, the MBAs came along 1910. Harvard decided that there needed to be a class for this middle management class. It was a class for that class. The middle management class needed to be taught how the bosses wanted the business run and how they could deal with the people that were under them. And so the first MBA was granted in 1912, which coincidentally was the year of the first Colorado caucus. That's when we adopted that. But a lot of changes back then. The MBA was one of them, and it had a specific purpose. And it was not to train entrepreneurs. I mean, people that graduated from Harvard that went out and started their own business were frowned upon. At DU, University of Denver, had the speaker, the president of Arrow Electronics, who is a terrific guy. He is just fantastic. And he gave a talk about graduating from college and then going back home to the farm. And his dad says, "What are you doing here?" And he says, "Well, the construction business we're doing." And he says, "I didn't send you to college to come back here. You go out and get a job." And that's what led him to get a job with a big corporation and eventually become its president. And that's fine. I'm not at war with large corporations. They have a tough row ahead. But people like the president of Arrow are going to figure out ways to turn this to their advantage. It's going to be a better world because of that. And sometimes there are economies of scale where a large competitor is helping the consumer. And I'm all for that. But I don't want unfair advantages. Why use? So at any rate, that's so. Where was I? We were talking about this Susan Pinker finding that you get together face to face, it changes biochemistry. And I was with the Bell System. I worked for Mountain Bell. My phone said consultant on it, but I was actually an employee, and we helped companies set up inside sales departments. We opened the first 800 call center in Kansas City. We got the first 800 numbers put on packages, Procter & Gamble and so forth, Coors here in Denver. And we started experimenting with the use of the telephone as a substitute in the selling process, telemarketing, which we rebranded telephone sales because that was the most hated term in the English language at that time, telephone sales. And when we first were promoting telemarketing, spent millions of dollars repositioning telephone sales, sort of like cold cream into moisturizer. You make people think in a different way about it. When we rebranded, you could run ads for telemarketers and get a different response than if you ran for telephone sales. Telephone sales, the very marginal people generally. Telemarketing, the more professional people would respond to that ad and you could hire them. And these call centers have grown, and now that may be the, one author recently said that's the coal mines of the 21st century. It's, like galley slaves chained to their oar in the call center. And we looked at ways to substitute telephone sales calls for personal sales visits. I'll talk to you about some of the things we discovered sometime. But the other thing we tried was telemanagement, where you'd substitute people getting together on the phone for face-to-face management meetings, and we could never make it work. In the Bell System, I remember going to Phoenix for one of our management meetings because we had people spread out, and you could not have the same results on a phone call that you did when you got people in the same room. I've never seen that reported until now with Susan Pinker's book, The Villager Effect. And what we were missing was that villager effect, the connection that you get as people that are in a yes, there are toxic meetings, and there are things you can do to structure a meeting so that it's most helpful. But all things considered equally, if you get on the phone, especially if you get on the internet, text messages. Now, there is information value. You can get blocks of data around and so forth. I'm not saying we throw out the internet. I think it's wonderful, and there are these advantages that are coming about through social media, especially. So we don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, but we need to not forget that we need to get together with real people from time to time. Yikes, we started late. We've only got a couple of minutes left. Well, those are two books that I would recommend. And if you've got time, I would also recommend that you pick up a copy, if you haven't already. Nearly everybody in America has the Strength Finder 2.0. And in the back, you cut open this envelope and go to a computer and take their test. And I did it, and here are my 5 strengths. I promised you that I would tell you these on the air today. Strategic. You see repercussions more clearly than others can. Trust your intuitive insights is what it tells me. So I try to do that. Adaptability, avoid roles that demand structure and predictability, such as starting the show on time. No way to wiggle out of that, at least right now. Maybe someday a producer, huh? Intellection, whatever that means. You list your ideas in a log or a diary. My ex-wife gave me a book and she said, why don't you write down your ideas in this? I was insulted. But she'd gotten tired of hearing this stream of ideas one after another. Come to find out, she's right. That's the first thing they suggest to me. Schedule time for thinking, take time to write, and find people who like to talk about the same issues that you do. And that's what we try to do at these face-to-face gatherings that I've been doing for over 20 years now. And we've got a variety of them. The Idea Cafe Startup Workshop will be at 2 o'clock, Panera Bread, 13th and Grant this afternoon. Socrates Cafe, sort of like those late night dorm discussions, 6 o'clock at the same place, Panera Bread. Join us, no RSVP required. If you Google it, it'll come right up, Colorado Socrates Cafe Society. There's a meetup group. You can RSVP and get more information. I do other groups as well, and more to come. But I'd like to see a healthy small group in every neighborhood and a healthy gathering type meeting in every community. If we do those two things, I think the rest of our problems will take care of themselves. We have a political system that depends, as Dwight Eisenhower said, in the political participation of all of us. He said, in our way of government, this is what Eisenhower said, in our way of government, politics has to be the part-time occupation of every citizen. But listening to radio talk shows and call in and posting on the internet is making the problem worse, not better. What's lacking is that gathering together. Sam Adams would have never, led the Boston Tea Party if he and his buddies hadn't been getting together. If the internet was around, they might have bitched about it, but they wouldn't have done anything about it, and they would have died, and we'd still be British subjects. Instead of, we're free, independent citizens. Let's take advantage of it, you and I. And I'll be here next Friday. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, give me a call, and we're going to start having a few people on. This afternoon, John Geis will be with us at the Idea Cafe. I got Meredith, though I'm hoping will be there. I got a couple other regulars that might be back, but we're going to start meeting there on a regular basis and not have the one-time rule so strictly enforced. Hopefully people are too busy to come every Friday, but from time to time, if you've been there before, we'd like you to drop back in. So that's the Capitol Hill Idea Cafe Startup Workshop this afternoon at 2 o'clock. I hope to see you there. And until next week at 10 o'clock Mountain Time here on the Startup Show, this is John Wren signing off.